The black sedan had barely rolled to a stop outside the glass tower when 6 armed men in tactical gear surrounded it, weapons lowered but eyes sharp, and the CEO inside felt her heart stop cold, because the man in the driver's seat, the quiet single father she had hired out of pity 3 weeks earlier, had just been saluted by a United States Navy commander who called him, "Sir." If this story about second chances and hidden heroes moves something in you, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who believes people deserve a fresh start, and subscribe to Real Dad's Story for more tales like this one. Now let's begin. Marcus Whitfield had not always been a man who checked mirrors twice before pulling into traffic. There was a time when his hands didn't shake slightly at red lights, when the sound of a car backfiring didn't send his shoulders into his ears. But that morning, like every morning for the past 11 months, he sat behind the wheel of a rented town car outside Halden Tower in downtown Atlanta, waiting for his newest assignment, a woman named Victoria Halden, the 34-year-old CEO of a logistics empire her father had built and she had since tripled in size. Marcus had taken the driving job because the alternative was worse. After his wife Renata passed from an aggressive cancer 18 months earlier, he'd been left alone with his 6-year-old daughter, Josephine, a rent payment he couldn't stretch, and a set of skills that didn't translate well into civilian resumes. Nobody wanted to hire a man whose LinkedIn read, Naval Special Warfare Operator, without asking a dozen questions he wasn't allowed to answer. So he drove. He drove executives to airports, drove tired lawyers home from midnight depositions, drove anyone who needed a car and didn't ask too many questions about the man behind the wheel. Victoria Halden had hired him almost as an afterthought. Her regular driver had quit without notice, and the agency sent over a tall, quiet man with graying temples and eyes that seemed to catalog every exit in a room before he sat down. She remembered thinking, on that first ride, that he drove like someone who had once been responsible for more than just getting from point A to point B. He checked his mirrors with a rhythm, not nervousness. 3 seconds left, 3 seconds center, 3 seconds right. She hadn't understood it then. She would later. Victoria's own life was not the fairy tale her Forbes profile suggested. Her father had died 2 years prior, leaving her a company worth $400 million and a board of directors who whispered behind her back that a woman couldn't hold the wheel steady. She worked 80-hour weeks not because she loved the grind but because stopping meant sitting with the silence of an empty penthouse and a phone that rarely rang for anything but business. She noticed things about Marcus that reminded her of her father, the discipline, the economy of words, the way he opened doors without being asked and never once looked at his phone while she spoke. One rainy Tuesday evening in April, Victoria's meeting ran 3 hours over. When she finally climbed into the back seat, exhausted and irritable, she found a small bag of crackers and a juice box tucked into the side pocket of the passenger door. Confused, she asked Marcus about it. He apologized immediately, explaining that his daughter sometimes rode along during his early morning pickups before school started, and he'd forgotten to clear out her snacks. It was the first time Victoria had heard him say more than 10 words about his personal life. She asked about the girl. Marcus hesitated, the way people hesitate when grief is still a fresh wound they're not ready to show a stranger, but something about the rain on the windows and the late hour loosened his guard. He told her about Josephine, about her gap-toothed smile, about how she still asked when Mommy was coming home even though he'd explained 100 times that Mommy was in heaven now. He told her about the nights he sat outside Josephine's door listening to her cry quietly so she wouldn't wake him, and how he never let her know he heard, because some grief a child needs to carry privately, in the dark, until she's ready to share it. Victoria sat in the back seat of her own car and wept, quietly, the way people weep when a stranger's pain reminds them how lonely their own success has made them. After that night, something shifted. Victoria began asking Marcus to drive her more often, requesting him by name from the agency. She learned that he packed Josephine's lunch every morning at 5:30 before his first pickup, that he did homework with her by phone during his breaks, that he had once been offered a corporate security position with triple the pay but turned it down because the hours would have meant a nanny raising his daughter instead of him. She began to see him not as hired help but as a man of remarkable, quiet strength, the kind of strength that didn't announce itself with medals or speeches but simply showed up, every single day, for the person who needed him most. What Victoria did not know, what Marcus had never told anyone outside a small circle of men who understood without needing explanation, was that 14 months before he ever opened a car door for her, Marcus Whitfield had been Senior Chief Whitfield, a decorated member of a naval special warfare team, with 3 deployments and a silver star tucked into a shoebox in his closet that he never showed Josephine because he didn't want her growing up thinking her father was defined by war instead of by bedtime stories and pancake Saturdays. He had left the service honorably when Renata got sick, needing to be present for chemotherapy appointments and school pickups in a way that deployments never allowed. The Navy had let him go with gratitude and a folded flag of respect, but the transition into civilian life had been its own private battlefield, one fought in grocery store parking lots and PDA meetings instead of overseas. The morning everything changed began like any other. Victoria had an early call with international investors and asked Marcus to pick her up at 6. As they merged onto the interstate, 3 black SUVs suddenly flanked the sedan, moving with a precision that made Victoria's pulse spike with fear. Before she could ask what was happening, the vehicles forced a gentle, controlled stop along the shoulder, and 6 men in tactical gear emerged, fanning out around the car with practiced discipline that looked less like a threat and more like a formation she didn't have the vocabulary to name. Victoria's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, certain this was a kidnapping, a corporate sabotage, something ripped from a nightmare. But then she saw Marcus's face in the rearview mirror, and it wasn't fear she saw there. It was recognition. It was something between exhaustion and relief. The driver's door opened. A broad-shouldered man in his 40s stepped forward, removed his cap, and rendered a crisp, formal salute. "Senior Chief Whitfield," he said, his voice cracking with an emotion that surprised Victoria more than the salute itself. "Commander Reyes wanted us to find you personally. We've been trying for months." Marcus stepped out slowly, and Victoria watched through the window as 5 more men, each with the same disciplined bearing, approached and shook his hand, embraced him, called him Sir and Chief and the man who carried Delgado 2 miles on a blown ankle. She learned, standing frozen in the back seat with tears she couldn't explain gathering in her eyes, that Marcus had spent the final year of his active service saving the lives of every man now standing on that highway shoulder, that he had refused a Medal of Honor nomination because he didn't want the attention, that he had simply gone home to raise his daughter and never told a soul. The commander explained they'd been searching for him because their unit was being honored at a ceremony in Washington, and no ceremony felt complete without the man who had brought them all home. Marcus, overwhelmed, kept glancing back at the car, at Victoria, as if apologizing for a truth he'd never meant to hide, not out of shame, but out of a quiet conviction that heroism wasn't something you performed, it was something you lived, in the small unglamorous moments nobody applauds, like packing juice boxes and sitting outside a grieving child's door. Victoria stepped out of the car that morning and, in front of investors who would later hear the story secondhand, in front of men who had survived because of Marcus's sacrifice, she made a decision that would alter both their lives forever. She didn't just keep him as her driver. She created a position within her company, Director of Veteran Family Services, built specifically around the skills, discipline, and heart she had watched him carry quietly for months. She wanted Marcus to build something that would help other single fathers, other veterans, other people carrying invisible battles behind ordinary jobs, so no one else would have to hide their courage the way he had. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment about the part that moved you most, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always finds its way back. Before we go any further, I want to ask something special of you. Comment the word honor if you believe every quiet hero deserves to be seen. 6 months later, Josephine started a new school near Halden Tower, one with an after-school program that let her stay close to her father's new office instead of an empty apartment. Victoria visited often, bringing crayons and terrible knock-knock jokes, slowly becoming something Josephine hadn't had in a long time, family, in the broadest and most healing sense of the word. Marcus still drove sometimes, not because he had to, but because some mornings, easing through quiet streets before the world woke up, felt like the closest thing to peace he'd found since Renata passed. And Victoria, who had spent years believing strength meant never needing anyone, finally understood that the truest kind of strength was the kind that showed up quietly, every single day, for the people who needed it most, and that sometimes, the person driving your car is carrying more courage than anyone in the boardroom above.